Hello, lovely artists. In today's video, we're going to be talking about how you know when to add a third color when you're color mixing. I'm going to be using this palette, which has Daniel Smith paints in it. And if you want to know the colors that I'm using, I'll be using all the colors except for the 4 on the end. So I'll be using a warm and a cool yellow, a warm and a cool red, a warm and a cool blue, and also an earthy red, the transparent red oxide. And if you don't have Daniel Smith, don't worry. Any cool and warm of the primaries is going to produce similar results. The first thing you always want to do, and I know I talk about this all the time, is to make a color chart. And the color chart is going to tell you a lot because essentially what you're doing is you're learning all of the different colors that you can mix by mixing one color with one color and using various increments. So for example, here I have the Hansa yellow light, and here's the phthalo blue, and I can see that here they make this pale bright green, but I can also go down here and look down here, and I've mixed a cooler bright green, and it's the same 2 colors. So depending on how much of each pigment you add, you can make that pigment more leaning towards one or the other. And that's one of the things you really learn when you do color charts like this. My color charts tend to be a little bit lighter because I like to see the actual color, but these same colors yield some very bright, vibrant colors as well. But sometimes, most of the time, when you're painting, you don't really want a green that's going to be as green as the ones that you'll mix, or you don't want a purple that's going to be as vibrant as the purple or the orange. You want to adjust things ever so slightly, and that's where adding a third color comes in. So today I'm going to show you an exercise to explore adding a third color and learning your own palette and how best to do that. So let's get started. For this exercise, you'll want to have a pencil, a spray mist bottle, a brush, and your colors, and then something to mix things in. So I could use this palette, but I'll probably use a combination of the two. And then off camera, I have 2 water jars, one for cleaning the brush and one for rinsing the brush after it's clean. And then I also have a cloth for drying the brush. So I always start by spritzing the colors to help reactivate them and giving them a second to adjust. I've made this simple little chart, and you can pause the screen if you want to take a screenshot or copy down what I've done. Essentially, I have the phthalo blues on the top and the French ultramarine on the bottom, since those are my 2 blues. And then my 2 yellows are the lemon yellow and the new gamboge. So on the top, I have the phthalo plus the lemon. Those are both my cool colors. So I have cool plus cool. And then I have the phthalo plus the new gamboge, which is my cool plus warm. And I'll put the mixes next to those in the box. Down on the bottom, I have the French ultramarine plus the new gamboge, which is my warm blue and my warm yellow. And then the French ultramarine plus the lemon, which is my warm blue plus my cool yellow. All of the pure mixes will be in this first column. And then in these boxes over to the right, I'll be exploring adding a third color. And the third color that I want to add here is going to be the complementary color, just to show how adding the complement can subtly shift your colors to make them more what you want them to be. So in this column, I'll be adding transparent red oxide. In this column, I'll be adding quinacridone rose. And in this column, I'll be adding the pyrrole scarlet to show you the different varieties that you can get by adding a different third color. The best way to do this exercise is to just have fun with it and not be looking to make anything perfect. So I'll start with the phthalo blue and the lemon, and I always mix my lighter color in first because I tend to get a better, crisper result that way. So I can make a variety of different greens just by playing around with the ratio of water and also the ratio of pigment. So all of these mixes that I'm getting are by mixing those 2 colors. So you can play around with that. I'm going to look for one of the middle of the road greens, probably this one. And into that, I'm going to mix my third color. So in this first column, I'm going to play around with taking that and mixing different amounts of the transparent red oxide, which if you have a burnt sienna is going to give you similar results. And I can see how it takes these greens that are very pretty, but also not colors that I normally see in nature, and it tones them down just a little bit. And depending on the ratio of how much I add of all of the colors, I'll get slightly different results. So this is making that green a little bit warmer, but it's still lighter and brighter. I could also go for a darker version of that by adding a bit more of all of the pigments and a bit less water. And get something a bit earthier. And you can see, even though these are two cool colors that give me cool mixes here, adding that transparent red oxide is really warming them up, but still keeping the bright crispness. One of the things I really like about phthalo is that it's a transparent color, so you tend to get really clean, light feeling mixes with them. And for that reason, I'll often start with a green that's too bright and just tone it down a little bit with another color in order to get the desired mix that I'm looking for. When I'm outside painting, I will usually just shift whatever color I have in my palette to be what I want it to be. And you get a lot of really happy surprises that way. But to be clear and to be more of a purist about today's exercise, I'm going to start fresh every time I add a third color so that you can get a better idea of the mixes that you can get. So starting with those same two colors again, I'll add the quinacridone rose. And because quinacridone rose is also a cool color, it's not going to make things warmer, even though it's a red. There's a little bit of element of warmth since you're adding two warm colors, but it's giving you more of a lighter, grittier color. And this is good for shadows or areas that are starting to fall into shadow. You'll often see a cooler color mixed in with that. So those are some of the options you can get with that. You can add as many or as little as you want to all of these. I'm trying to make the lesson a bit briefer, but you can see if I take a really vibrant mix of the phthalo and the lemon and then into that add some more of that red, it's going to give me a much different color that's more towards the green shade. So you can see how different that is from that, but it's the same three colors, just different ratios of pigment, different ratios of water. And let's add a bit more of the quinacridone rose to that and really push it. And it's going to start to take us more towards a gray, which again would be nice for a shadow color because it is a greenish gray. But again, I can lighten that up again if I'm painting and I think, oh, that's not good. Just by adding a bit of yellow into this mix that's dominant with the red, it's going to warm things up a little bit. So that is a completely different look to the looks I'm getting up here when I've added them without really going overboard and pushing that red. So I can get this variety of different mixes by adding the quinacridone rose. And I can start with that mix again, and into that add some of the pyrrole scarlet. So again, I can take that mix, which is very bright, and I can add a bit of the warm red. And again, so we have a cool yellow and a cool blue, and into that I'm going to add some warm red. So it would stand to reason that this is going to make things a little bit warmer, and it does not disappoint. So you can see I've taken that green and it's still very bright and light. We have two transparent colors here. Not only are these cool colors, but they're transparent colors. So the mixes that I'm getting with them are very bright and very crisp. So that takes that color and warms it up quite nicely. I can add a little bit more, push it, and get it to look even more earthy. And then again, I can, if I want to make it bluer, I can add a bit more of the blue to change it up slightly. And if I want to add a bit more of the pyrrole scarlet into that, I can do so. And every time I add a little bit more of every single pigment, the color is going to shift ever so slightly. And for this reason, I don't like to take color charts when I'm painting outside because I've done that in the past, and what happens is the color chart becomes a crutch. Although it's nice to have if you're really searching for a color and you can't find it, you have to be careful to not spend all your time looking at your color chart. You're better off just using your logic and thinking, all right, I have a dark color here, and that's not as dark as I want it to be. I want it to be lighter. So I can just take a little bit of that color off on the side and add a little bit more of my lighter color to it, which would be the yellow, and I can lighten things up just like that without needing a color chart or needing to do anything. I'm just using my logic. So if we take our warmer yellow, which in this palette is the New Gamboge, and we mix a green by using the phthalo blue again, which is the cooler blue, you're going to get a warmer green because that New Gamboge is a warm color. But because the phthalo is transparent, it's still a bright, crisp green. This is one of the reasons I really, really love phthalo. Now I can make that even warmer depending on how much of the yellow I add, or darken things up and make it really bright if I add more of both pigments. And that's going to give me a much warmer green that's a bit brighter and darker. But again, maybe I don't see that color per se in nature, and I want to try adding a bit of a third color to it. If I add a bit of transparent red oxide, it can make it even earthier. And if I push it and add a little bit more, it's going to make it an orangey color. So into that, I can add some more of my two first colors, my New Gamboge and my phthalo blue. And all I'm doing is just playing around with lots of different mixes of these three colors. And look at how wildly different the results are. 1, 2, 3. So this is a danger when you're looking at a color chart. If you think, oh, I want that color, and I've mixed these three colors to get it, well, you might have a bit of fiddling to do. And you do have to actually learn it and use your logic a little bit. So if I wanted to make that cooler again, I'll add a little bit of water and a little bit more yellow. I'm sorry, if you want to make it a little bit warmer. And that's going to get me closer to this. And I can get it all the way back to that by adding more and more water and more yellow, but it's just that push and pull. And you can get some really lovely natural greens by adding the transparent red oxide. I'll mix my base color again over here. And into that, I'm going to add a bit of the quinacridone rose, which in theory, because this is a cool red, is going to make things a bit cooler because we now have a cool red and a cool blue, and only the yellow is warm. But it's still very heavy with the yellow there. So maybe add a bit more. And I can get like a khaki-ish color. And this is a good color for shadows. That right there is a beautiful shadow color. And I can just push and pull and play around. Maybe I want to make this whole thing a little bit more green, visibly green. So I'll add more of the yellow. And that gets me a whole plethora of different mixes. Now again, I'll mix the New Gamboge and the phthalo to get my base color. That is much brighter than I want it to be, but if I add a little bit of water, take some of that off the palette, and add a bit more of the yellow into that, it should lighten things up sufficiently. So if I take that and add a bit of the Pyrrole Scarlet, it should make things a little bit warmer. And it's still very bright and very clean. But it does take that color and warm it up just a little bit more. And I can push that envelope, add a bit more of the Pyrrole Scarlet. and make it look a bit more earthy by doing that, because now I'm more towards the yellow and red of the spectrum and less towards the blue. Or I could add some more blue into that mix again if I want something that looks a little bit less realistic, but it's still a beautiful color. You might see this in an interior, or maybe just dots of this in a shadow. And again, if it's too cool, I can warm it up with my yellow. So you're remembering the original 3 colors you've got, and you're playing around with it. And a lot of times when you're color mixing, it's easier to just experiment with the same 3 colors than it is to panic and start adding a 4th color or a 5th color, or really getting yourself lost and creating mud. If you stick with the same 3 colors, whatever 3 they might be, you're going to really learn to be able to push your palette to doing interesting things that will help you when you're painting. Now, if you're new to painting, you might be thinking, well, why bother with adding the 3rd color when I could just go to my warm blue and my warm yellow and make warm colors that way? Or I could add a warm blue and a cool yellow and make things that way. Well, let me show you a little bit about why that logic isn't always practical when you're painting in nature. So we're going to start with the New Gamboge, which is our warm yellow, and the French Ultramarine, which is our warm blue. And because the French Ultramarine is a granulating color, even though it's transparent, it tends to look just a little bit heavier and dirtier than the mixes that you'll get with the phthalo. So you can see that here, that's a warm green, but it's a very different warm green to the warm greens I'm getting here or even here. It's just slightly different, which is a good thing because it gives you more variety when you're painting. But it is a different look. In general, if you mix a warm yellow with the warm blue, you're going to get lots of gritty, earthy colors, and they're going to tend to be, by nature, just a little bit heavier. And you could just take those same 2 colors and really adjust what you can get with it. So again, as I did before, I'm going to go for a more middle of the road green. I think this might be it. And into that, I'm going to mix these 3 pigments separately just to see a variety of mixes that I can get with it. Need a little bit more blue. I think that might get us there. There. So you can see how earthy and almost heavy these colors are. They're good in a foreground. But if you see a pop of bright green that seems a little bit warmer in the distance, it's better off to go with the cooler yellow and the cooler blue because it's going to look a bit lighter and not as heavy, which is how things tend to look in nature as you recede into the distance. So I'll take that mix and into that add just a dash of the transparent red oxide. And again, because this is warm and these are warm, it's going to really push you towards oranges. And a lot of times if you see wheat in the field or you see some pops of green that are slightly orangish, transparent red oxide is going to be a good one to choose. So you can see I'm pushing it more towards green here by bringing it more into the mix. And all of these tend to be a little bit more towards the red. So I'm going to add a little bit more blue in it because if I add the yellow, it's just going to keep it orange. By adding a bit of blue, I can bring it a little bit back towards the green more. And if I continue with that, I can take over with the transparent red oxide and the blue, and I can often get a good shadow green by adding more pigment that has less of the yellow. Okay, I've mixed up more of the pure pigments, the yellow and the blue, and into that I'm going to mix the quinacridone rose. And now we're adding a cool color into our warm mix. So the quinacridone rose is cooler in nature, so it should tone things down just a little bit. And again, it's tending to pull things more towards red because of all the warmth in both of these two pigments. So if you're looking for greens that are more reddish, this is a good combination, the French ultramarine and the new gamboge, and then experimenting with different reds. So I can add a little bit more and really make a muddy, almost brownish green with it. And then again, if I want to pull it back, add a bit more of the yellow and a bit more of the blue, and I can get some really dark greens with that. And again, this is a cooler green that you might see in the shadows. If I add some water into that, it can even be a pale color that you might see in some foliage. All right, now we'll mix up the French ultramarine and new gamboge, and into that add a bit of the pyrrole scarlet. All right, I've mixed a bit of a darker green there. Not too bad. All right, it's actually a nice clean mix. So into that, we're going to add our warm red, which is the pyrrole scarlet, and it's going to be similar, but a little bit more dominant than the transparent red oxide, because the transparent red oxide, remember, has some yellow in it. It's more of an orange color and less of a red. But you can see it's moving things more towards an orangey color, an orangey green. I very rarely will use this combination, but sometimes it's good to explore things that you don't do because you might be surprised. Maybe you've dismissed a mix once before, but then upon further exploration, you decide, you know what, I could use that. So you can see this is really taking us away from the green, but again, add more blue into that. And you're going to get a really pretty darker green. That's also warmer. All right, we have one more row, and let's quickly go through that. So here we're going to mix another warm and a cool, only this time our cool color is the yellow and our warm color is the blue. So that's our lemon yellow and our French ultramarine. And this is a color that I use a lot for greens in nature because it pretty quickly gets you to something that looks realistic for a pale green color. But you can compare it to the colors that you'll get here with the new gamboge, and it's slightly different, right? So everything has slightly different characteristics. I can add a bit more blue to it to make it a bit darker. Or again, I could add a bit more yellow to it. It's fairly limited what you can do with this color combination. So adding more pigment is going to make it a bit brighter. So I can make it a bit darker and cooler with a little bit more of the lemon yellow. And if I add more pigment into that, I can warm it up again. But you can see how these feel a bit heavier than the phthalo blues. I'm losing a bit of my light outside, which I like to usually paint in bright sunlight. So I'm going to very quickly add a little bit more of this. I'll do a time lapse with that, and then we'll come back. Okay, so there you have it. This is just with natural sunlight. It's very late in the day. And then if I use my studio light, you can see that the colors shift slightly and it brings out a little bit more of the nuance. I don't know, I always hesitate to know exactly what light to film in. Natural sunlight tends to be best, but when we look at artwork inside, it tends to be more with lights like these. So that's another interesting shift. I think you could see more of the subtleties in the natural daylight right here, and a little bit less when I add some more of this warmer studio light. But in general, these are all the pure mixes of just one yellow and one blue, and then these are all the ones taking the pure mixes and adding the transparent red oxide, then taking those mixes and adding the quinacridone rose or the pyrrole scarlet. And you can see how by adding a third color and playing around with different ratios of water and pigment, you can get a plethora of everything that you need. So this is a really fun exercise that I encourage everybody to do. And it's not just applicable with greens. You can do the same thing with oranges or with violets or with any combination by taking different third colors and seeing what combinations you can get and how you can shift the dynamic of your mixes. I hope this was helpful and that you have a beautiful day. And I'll see you in the next video. Happy painting!